everybody, it's Rob Trick. Headphones. Just trying out my new setup. There's a few issues, like I have doors wide open and stuff, so you can hear my coat. But just chatting. The title says something about comedy, but I'm not interested in comedy today. I'm just interested in how everybody is doing, since this seems to be it seems to be a mental health month, and wondering how everyone is doing. See if that comes up. So option, good, not so good. So I'm a guy who has lived a certain type of life being in a business that is essentially self-employed. Although there would be both an argument and a certain degree of collectivism in our business. Obviously, comics act. How do we act? Let me see if I can get the chat going here. There's so many features. They add so many features, and they make it easier, then they make it harder. Back and forth. Featured link. Preview link. Alerts. I've asked you how you are. And I'm just checking in, basically. Let's see if anybody... They've got the throughput and the maximum resolution and all this other stuff. So I'm contemplative. I'm kind of not a pushover anymore. And I have current viewers, peak viewers. I'm kind of, you get to a point in your life where you know you're alone, and good or bad, and for some people that happens way earlier. They may happen at a time when you're very, very young. And then for comedians, there's a level of integration that takes place. And one of the reasons people are funny is because their coping mechanisms become entrenched in their behaviors. And so we know that the root of comedy is pain, but we don't necessarily know that everybody's in pain in some way. That's sort of what the Buddha said, that we're, what's the term? Suffering. We all suffer. And the earlier pain happens, the sooner you integrate it. So that's my feeling. So you have people who are well integrated in their pain. Then you have others who are just dealing with it. Like some people don't feel any pain until they're into their 20s, maybe when they leave home. Other people don't have pain at all until someone dies. Other people don't have pain until they're they don't have pain until they're by the way, if you're online with me and you want to just let me know who you are, and I can direct the conversation spiritually towards maybe things I know about that we both share without necessarily giving it away. So when I've taught comedy, one of the things I wanted to integrate was the idea that you do have some pain, and how are you going to express it? And yesterday I had a conversation with another comic, and we talked about how some people can deal with it right there and then other people have to go through a process of working it out. And in art, we can represent all the different sides of an argument various ways. I was just watching the morning show on Apple TV, and Steve Carell's character is caught in a Me Too scandal. So the piece, being the morning show, gets to deal and have a character that actually acts out the despotic behaviors of and involved in a Me Too thing. And there's some other characters who seem to be heading that way. In other words, people are attracted to each other in these situations. So the art proposes that these characters represent these issues as the negative attributes or the negative players in this scenario, and then the protagonists tend to be the victims of such, or at least are used as set up in. I haven't watched the whole thing, so I have to assume that there's some protagonists that get taken down through this process because they knew something. Anyway, the fact is that the art has the opportunity, or that chosen medium, and this is sort of where Marshall McLuhan was going with that the medium is the message. So the medium is saying that we can have a collaborative discussion using characters to work out what we should feel about this situation and who the victims are. Because on some level on that show, they're hinting that in the past, the victims have been the people who are in the spotlight and not the people who are hidden. And what we're learning more and more is that there's all these hidden people that are victimized by some level of power. So that is television, and that's a TV show about a TV show. Then there's, which right away in some way already comments on the fact that TV has this aspect to it. And then, so part of why we were talking about that was that TV, we have doing comedy. How does a single person represent the people in an office situation? So do we just not talk about it? Or do we find a way to express it creatively on our own, playing all the characters that a TV show represents? Or do we do a painting? Do we do a painting about it? Or do we do a sculpture about it? And again, we go through these steps in order to find the best way to convey what we think about something. And part of the problem there is there's already people waiting for you to say and do what are apparently inappropriate things. So you have, so how would you represent the Me Too movement? I'm sticking with the morning show here. How would you represent someone in the Me Too movement? How would you show it if you were showing the situation in as sculpture? How would you show it as a painting? How would you show it as a song? How would you show it as dance? And every one of these things is going to be, so some things, because they're obscured by the movement or obscured by the materials, you can't tell what it's actually about straight up. And a lot of art is like that, where you can't actually, you just know there's something being said, and you can't necessarily perceive what's being said the same way that you would if you were watching something on TV or in a movie. So so sometimes you're being spoon-fed the art, and sometimes it's obscured because we can't interpret it as quickly as we would if it's straight dialogue. So I have been wrestling with that concept, probably not necessarily since Me Too, but some of the other things that have come up. How do you take sides in a war? show that you can't take sides because you can't see what's really true? How do you take sides when, or how do you express your feelings about, the Olympics, homelessness, without actually either experiencing it yourself or knowing all the issues? And I think there's a tendency for, especially from what I'm seeing, is that there's a lot of top-down management of ideas. Even right now, we're dealing with higher interest rates and inflation in this country, and using higher interest rates to drive. I don't even know what the policy really is, but using high interest rates to drive down pricing, especially of houses, and so on and so forth. So how do I represent these things as a comic? How do I make the best case for my thoughts and what I believe and what my wisdom would dictate, versus some of the things that go on with in any form of and how an artist will at some point represent their opinion. Like, we have to make choices. So when you see, like, one of the things I do is I do a lot of these sort of portraiture stuff, and I don't look good in them, so to speak. And one of the reasons I do is because I think there's more telling in the imperfections than there is in the perfections. I see a lot of people who make sure they look good for their photos, and I'm not sure it conveys the same level. I'm pretty sensitive to what's not being said as much as I am to what's being said, and that's because I am an artist. And then you have to explain yourself all the time, not necessarily to people who enjoy your art, but to people who don't understand it, who will challenge you on, why do you obscure your image, or why do you, right? So I've done, if you look through my profile, you'll see some of the artwork I do where I take what is ostensibly a beautiful piece of landscape, and I've obscured it in some way because there's a feeling I want to convey more than I want to convey strictly the art itself. And right away you're into a loop there where you've made choices to obscure it in a certain way. Why do you stop there? Why don't you keep going? So, and then there's compositional elements, so it's a very, very, very complicated process to come up with art, but it's not an absolute. So again, hearkening back to this show about the Me Too campaign and watching, and then there's a dogmas attached. So you've got these watchdogs out there who are attacking people for appearing to be on one side or the other, right? If we were to, so Dave Chappelle does a Netflix special, and he deals with trans, and he deals with trans where in the story he talks about hiring the person that allegedly had such a problem with him, and he does it in such a way that he alienates more people who are, in this case, trans. But he's making a point about the fact that we all just need to connect. And then because he's used the word trans and seems to be isolating that population, and they don't need that kind of shine on their situation, he gets quote unquote canceled. But here's the real problem. What if you're canceled to such an extent that the people who support you are not who you actually want to represent you? So, and you can see situations like that, maybe with Chappelle, maybe with Louis C.K. And why are they all challenging the idea of other people guarding the language and guarding culture? Why are they not? It just can't be that every comic who is feeling this is actually all wrong. Now, they might be sort of wrong, or they might be wrong in certain ways of presenting it, but they can't be all wrong. I just don't believe that. I know there's a lot of, I've been in this business for 40 years, and I knew there were a lot of knee-jerk comics out there who were just capitalizing on what would be the opposite of some sort of standard party line. So in Canada, we have the East and the West. And in Western Canada, there were lots of people who they would make fun of the first peoples of our country, of natives. They would say, oh, sorry, natives. Oh, sorry, first peoples. Oh, first Canadians. Or they would go through a string of things, tagging the joke with some sort of apology, which was not meant to be an apology at all. It was to make fun of all the different changes. And I think the people, the audience that watches that, and particularly out west, a vast majority of them agree with the comic. And so the comic is doing all this material that agrees with their greatest support. And that intuition or that connection with those people is why they say the things they do. Whereas in Ontario, and being in probably a more, I'll call it enlightened area of the city, like when I hung out with people from Queen Street, I was in the Queen Street world from the early 80s. I'll say I was with it or around it, but I wasn't completely part of it. And that was just a product of where I lived, and I was uptown a bit at the time, so I was never going to be downtown in Queen Street. And there were things that went with that. People doing drugs, people, lots of sexuality that I was never going to be a part of. Lots of music, lots of painting, lots of art, creativity abounding. And I was living in a slightly or near suburban house, and I was dipping into that world without being a part of it. Later on, when I moved in with my partner now, my wife, I was living near Queen Street, and I loved it. I loved the energy that it represented. I loved the activities. The fact that people weren't trying to be normal, so to speak. Anyway, so you live in that world, and you have it gets an energy. There's an energy to that. So then I know there's rules attached to communicating with that group. In this case, some of these people. I have lots of friends who are gay, and I have lots of friends of ethnic and whatnot, whatever the categories you want. But I also realized that they were putting certain conditions on how you communicated, which I think probably became the woke movement. But I kind of always sided with them. I sided with them because I found them to be more empathetic to ideas I had in my heart, but not my intellect. I just am a humanist at heart. So I look at some of these movements, and I go, yes, of course I'm on your side. I just don't like the way you behave. And that said, they don't have to like the way I behave. I just find that I'm probably likely to support people because I really have no control. Why would I think that I have control over the way someone has sex or who they have sex with or what their pronouns are? This is none of my concern. I will respect what they demand of me in a cordial way, but if it's just a demand, I probably won't listen. So, and part of what I'm saying here is, and I'm being open about how I'm asked to help. Of course I help on a one-to-one basis. I'm always sympathetic. But when I see people gathering in a group and speaking similar ways, I think to myself, are you being positive? Are you being forward thinking in terms of actual behaviors. Because if we all have to stamp our feet to get something, I think there's problems either way. The other thing is that I have a ton of sympathy for people whose families reject them. I have a ton of sympathy for people whose families don't support them. But I also know, because I'm both a socialist in thought, in my heart, in my gut, but sometimes I'm a conservative in my brain. And when I say that, I mean I understand economics, and I understand buy low, sell high. I've had to negotiate for things here and there. So I can't make demands in lots of situations, or I won't work at all. So whilst we stand on this earth perpendicular to its soil, don't forget that we don't just have to get along because it helps in the long run, but because on some level it's a functional thing to get along. Economically, it makes sense to get along, to negotiate in good faith, to arrive on time. And I see a lot of people casting aspersions about people who talk about common sense values, who may or may not have a toe in the game, if you will, a toe, a foot, skin in the game. Lots of people seem to sort of take sides. It's always taking sides, and I'm stuck in the middle a lot because I know both sides, and I know both sides. I know East and West. I know North and South. I know American and Canadian. I know Europe or Western Hemisphere and Europe. I know land and sea. You name it. I know most of the positions, and still I reserve judgment sometimes unless it's life and death. And that's probably where my lots of these things seem to be crucial and seem to be, and that sort of occurred to me today as Putin is interviewed by Tucker Carlson, and I watched this parts of the interview. I can't watch all of it because I have to go and throw up every so often because I know Putin's he's trying to stop the U.S. supporting Ukraine because they're running out of money too. And it's a game about money. So if it's a game about money and suddenly the U.S. Has interest over Ukraine, does that mean that Russia's going to stop, or are they going to become the country that's perpetrating the guerrilla tactics that Ukraine has to use? In other words, it's never going to end until we end it. It's never, and that's why the art and the ability to argue both sides in a TV show like The Morning Show or in a stand-up special, we're taking the chance to offend in order to offer solutions. Steve Carell is schmarmy on the show. Do we like that about people? Probably not. But they're out there, and they're not only are they out there, they're everywhere. Do we like Jennifer Aniston's character? Probably not on some level, even though she seems to be on the other side. Although I suspect that she is so hardened that if you watch the show, and actually a very good rendering of a character, considering we're so used to her as a member of the cast of Friends. And then there's what's her name? She plays Bradley Jackson, and of course it's a man's name. Ironically, is Bradley a female name? I don't know, but Bradley Jackson is the real sort of I'll call it the art of the piece. And I say that because she's the one who gets to speak the words that no one else will, to speak the unspoken thoughts that art should do. She's the one who comes out and calls a spade a spade. And that's why it's powerful, right? And it's not the hardest show to look. It's predictable on many, many levels. The show is predictable. But many of these situations are happening around us all over the place. That's why the show works, because it's depicting truth. But, and I hearken to add that I'm a stand-up comedian who's traveled this country since 1988. I traveled, and I've done some form of theater since 1983. So that would be 41 years of being in a business that I thought I'd never be in. But when I used to have a show in Toronto called Rants for Rent, and I sometimes think of that show, and I think to myself, because I used to have rules like no one could interfere or bounce off of another person's ideas, or take umbrage with what anyone else said, because I appreciate the idea that someone articulating as much as they can about something that they think or feel needs to be allowed as a process, and not necessarily as a product, but as a process to get to the final point. And that a lot of people were had I run the show 10 years later, I might have been canceled myself. And in some ways, I've been canceled and I've done nothing. So, but the higher truth is this. Louis C.K. survived his ridiculousness. I think he was exposing himself to people. But, you know, if he's 1 million people in a country of 300 million people paying $20 a shot for his video, you know, that's $20 million he makes. So he doesn't have the majority of the people, but he has 1 million people. And that's sort of the despotism of a country of 300 million, is there's always a market for your ideas. It's happening in China. You know, if China decides something's going to be a certain way, if they put someone in as a star, they become a star. I'm sure it's true in Russia to some extent. They can make and break people easily. Dave Chappelle's not short money, I'm sure. Even Bill Cosby probably would have an audience, even at this, after everything that we found. So instead of canceling people and sort of having this righteous hold on them, because this is the other side of the coin, is righteousness is a product of, and a type of elitism of it's an inclusive thought. It's a inside the game we play, I hold all the cards. Or at the playground, I brought the ball. And I've seen it many, many times as a parent, where the family that brings the ball starts determining the rules for how people engage. So really, and I'm not encouraging people to speak their minds in other situations. I'm just saying, if you don't like the way the game's being played over here, then you go play it over there, right? And the only thing that matters is that there's 4 hoops instead of 2, or 4 goalie nets. There was a family that I knew when my kids were young that would bring the nets, and we'd had these great games of hockey, but they always determined the rules. And I watched that happening, and I went, this is not healthy. It's not healthy because it's creating a hierarchy, and it's the parents doing it. In the old days, it was the kids. When I grew up, it was Andrew Bell who would play hockey with us. In fact, Andrew Bell would play hockey with us, and suddenly he stopped. As soon as we got a little bit better, he didn't have the same control over us. And that was, to me, it was quite obvious that this guy even at my young age, could figure out that this guy was power hungry. And I met him when he was older, and he was still carrying grudges from back then. And he was so. Our development as people is to be able includes the idea that we have to include the ideas of other people, at least for consideration, and to mill them about in other and if we need, and if need be, that we spit them back out in such a way that they're digestible for other people. So the other thing I came up recently was there is nothing new. So I've been dealing with I've watched lots of situations where, in this case or these days, it's about what's your stance on Israel and Palestine. And it was very interesting. I watched one woman who's a Palestinian and another woman who is a Canadian, a Jewish woman living in Canada. And I realized they sounded the same. And I went, that's bizarre, because you should meet. I think, you know that thing where you go to a party, oh, you've got to meet so-and-so, they're just like you. Well, generally that's not a good idea. However, Bill Russell had a saying, admire your enemies, because it is like them that you end up most. So we look at these situations and we think that there's some sort of uniqueness to the positions and the behaviors. And in fact, it's just the same people wearing different clothes, the same people singing different songs. It's the same people speaking the same truths. So while you want to go on and on about, I think you're only, in this case, you're only, for the people on the sidelines, and I mean there are people on the sidelines, not that we're not involved, because I think we are all involved, but for the people on the sidelines, we see that they sound the same. And that worries me more, because if they're not listening to each other, and I don't think that this is the time to listen. I mean, I think this is the time to listen, but I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. But generally and genuinely, these people are the same. And that's where the bigger problem exists, because if they don't back down and surrender, both sides won't exist. And you're not surrendering to each other, you're surrendering to the fact that you are the same. So I don't know if I'm going to get chastised for this, but I'm willing to say that. I think we were all, in the old days, before we knew anything about the cultures of Iran and Iraq, we were always amused at the fact that their names were spelled so similarly. Or the fact that the Scottish people, or the situation in Ireland, Northern Ireland, that the Irish and the Northern Irish were essentially the same people. And people say, well, no, there's a lot of Scottish people that were moved to Ireland in the Ulster Plantation. And I said, well, did you know there were a lot of Irish people that were moved to Scotland when it was part of a Gaelic kingdom? In other words, the same people have been going back and forth in every situation. There's love between them. There's hatred. It's really about family. We are families, and we are fighting as families, not as countries, not as diplomatic entities. Instead, we're undiplomatic family entities. Sometimes I think democracy works. And then I think of situations like what we're going through, where you know that an entire block of people were going to vote one way and an entire block of people are going to vote the other. Democracy only works when the idea of the individual is inescapable and the idea of the group is almost well, let's put it another way. When we look at things like businesses, the idea of these mega malls and these mega stores, and the old way of small stores with cobblers and stuff. Why do you think we look at so many movies where they show the village in and around Hogwarts, or we show the town life on Outlander, or because that's what we're missing. We're missing the idea of one person running a business and trying to make a go of it, as opposed to the guarantee of Walmart. Uh, so I've said a lot of things here today, and a lot of what I'm saying is essentially that we aren't different. We aren't different in any way. Uh, we 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 keep trying to find ways to differentiate ourselves. But I can promise you, if I have to take blood from that body, I'm not going to ask what their religion is so that I can live. In fact, it would be kind of a neat moment. I've seen videos where there's been heart transplants of a man's wife died in a car accident, and her liver was given to some guy, or heart was given to some guy who's black. And when the white guy hugged the black guy was sort of uncomfortable, but realized that it was his wife's heart he was hugging. And the black guy went along for the ride. So where are those moments? It's funny how in a time like this, those moments disappear. They disappear off the internet. They're not as prevalent. So we are looking at bombings, and look, I will tell you, and it's hard to prove this, but I forecasted all of this, not as a conspiracy theorist, but because the first thing I predicted was that prices were going to go up after the pandemic, and we've seen that. I mean, I just think the barons of Canadian/Western democracies, the robber barons, because that's what they are, and that's not a new term. The robber barons, which makes it akin to about the 1850s. Does it sound familiar? Irish potato famine. That these guys would find a way to scorch the earth for all the money that they feel they'd lost. Now, think about the absurdity of that. People who have businesses who are making money hand over fist before they raised the prices decided that they were owed more money in a given amount of time. And because I am educated, have read plenty of things like Buddhism, and I often go, well, do we have enough for today? Do we have enough for the week? That's where my limitations of demands go in terms of consumption and entitlement sort of reach. And that is about, I grow my own food, and I think let's put it this way, if you think about being a Buddhist, you're going to start growing your own food. If you think you're a Buddhist, you're probably going to have compassion for others. You're going to let go of your precepts about how people should live. And I'm not saying that Buddhism is some sort of cure-all or panacea. I'm saying it's just they're aligned thoughts. I'm not going to kill the rat I catch. I'm going to catch the rat. I'm just going to let it go somewhere else. And if you're kind in moments, if you're kind and compassionate, and if you're not necessarily trying to win every single situation you're in, knowing full well that you have the ability and the faith in yourself, and not in some elusive God, but in yourself, to pick yourself up in lots of situations and continue on. then you won't demand of others that you are allowed to survive. Because I think that's at the root of this, a lot of this, is that if you don't have the ability to survive on your own without attachments and without technology and without, I see it a lot. And that's why you send your kid to camp, so he learns how to make a fire. And that's why you send him so they know how to walk places on a hike, but walk to the store and walk if your car breaks down. You're building all those things in instead of always guaranteeing that they'll have whatever they want because you can pay for it. So are we raising dependence or are we raising independence? It's funny, Bill Burr and I we don't talk, but we agree on a lot of things, and I have a lot of convergent ideas with his. I don't know why he thought of it. I think he thought of it before he had kids. I had my kids, and he had said, I'll start with what I said. I said, you've got to don't raise a child, raise an adult, or raise an adult, don't raise a child. And he said, raise a grown-up, his phrase. So that's just parallel thoughts, and it's not because we're both comedians. It's just maybe he sees the same thing, is that we're babying our children. And I believe that by babying our children, we've babied our adults. And we have a lot of people who don't want to surrender what they've gained. I'll put it another way. If you remember, the Toronto Maple Leafs were owned by a guy named Harold Ballard. And he had a grade 9 education, and I suspect he wasn't even there that much for grade 9. So when he gets out in the real world, he thinks the world is you work really hard for something and you get it, and then you keep it, and you hold it, and you hold it, and you hold it. Now, he may have been great with charities, because I hear people can be that. But the point of many of the people who end up in this apparent version of capitalism, holding tight-fisted on the things they have actually less of an education than the people who go all the way through and work for these guys. So I wonder sometimes, I have lots of images in my head, and this is what art is. Art is images in your head. And one of the images is the idea of a whip. So you have someone who's central to the whip, like a Harold Ballard, and you have all these people who have to live on the end of the whip. And whatever he chooses to do, we have to abide by it, or we're going to fall off the whip and have a crash. So a guy like Harold Ballard falls off this whip, or begins the motion, and there's all these behaviors that are attached to this, which are predicated on the fact that he has a full grade 8 education / part of grade 9, and he moves the whip around. And if you're smart enough, then you want to be around him and make some money, you can hold on to that whip. As soon as you think that, and then when it all crashes, when he dies or whatever happens, because that's what did happen, there's this cascade of craziness because everything he's done has been predicated on a grade 9 education. He hasn't provided insurance for people, or he's underpaid people for all those years. And I can promise you that there is an institutional understanding in this country that we... Hey, my son's here. There's an institutional reliance on these types of corporations. Family businesses are like that. The crazy behaviors by the owners, because they're basically spoiled. So is that capitalism? I don't know. Anyway, I'm going to check in with my son. I'll leave it there. Love you all, and we'll talk another day. Bye.